My name's Marta. I'm 31, and on my father's 70th birthday, my brother raised his glass and told me to pack my bags because the house I'd sacrificed my life to protect was being sold. He called me a failure, an embarrassment, the family burden. Laughter followed sharp and cold as if my heartbreak was the evening's entertainment. My father sat slumped at the head of the table, his eyes fogged, confusion painted across his face. Beside him, Cassandra, his new wife, rested her manicured hand on his shoulder, like she owned not just the man, but the legacy my mother left behind. Every balloon, every photograph I'd hung on those walls to honor Dad's life blurred as my throat tightened. The same kitchen where my mother once taught me to bake now echoed with the sound of betrayal. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, the weight of years of sacrifice collapsing into silence. But what they didn't know, what none of them could imagine, was that I had been preparing for this ambush for months. I didn't storm out that night. I excused myself, slipped my phone from my pocket, and whispered into it, "It's happening." On the other end, Nathan's voice was calm. Uncle James was already on his way. They thought I was cornered, humiliated. What they didn't know was that I had cameras hidden in plain sight blood tests ready for review and a legal plan that would shatter their smiles. Before I go further, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been the outcast in your own family. Because trust me, this story is just getting started. I used to think houses were just wood and wiring. My father would laugh at that and tap the archway between the dining room and the hall, the one he rebuilt after a winter pipe burst the year I turned 8. He'd say a house carried weight the way a bridge did, forces moving through it loads. It had to bear the odd sway you learned to read with your hands. My mother would add, almost like a secret, that a house kept receipts. It remembered who loved it and who only used it. Back then, the Victorian didn't feel grand so much as fussy. Velvet curtains that gathered dust, a front parlor nobody sat in, a staircase that whined like an old dog when you climbed it after midnight. The kitchen was the only place that breathed, butter sizzling in a skillet, the snap of green beans. My mother's voice humming to the radio, low and warm the way people sing when they're not trying to impress anyone. I learned measurements by feel, pinch, handful, a splash until the dough became a living thing that pushed back against the heel of my palm. On Sundays, my father spread blueprints on the kitchen table, anchoring the corners with mugs. He'd point to lines and talk about loads and tensile strength, while Victor, already broad-shouldered at 12, pretended to follow. Elena doodled flowers in the margins. I watched, chin in my hand, the way kids watch fireworks, not understanding each spark but thrilled by the noise. When I asked if I could hold the rolled plans, he smiled and passed them to Victor instead. "Careful," he told my brother. "You'll be the one to make sense of this world." I told myself it didn't sting, even when it did. I learned to hide ache like you hide a chipped plate in a back cabinet. Favoritism rarely arrives with a sign around its neck. It shows up as little decisions that pile into a wall. Victor got the first slice of roast, the front passenger seat, the new sneakers because he's growing faster. When I won a district writing contest, my father nodded proud for the length of a breath and then asked Victor about his math test. Mom squeezed my finger under the table. "You are not a wallflower," she whispered. "You are a vine." I didn't understand then how a vine can break brick. One summer, my father built us a treehouse in the maple out back. He let Victor operate the drill. Elena handed up nails like a nurse in an operating room. I stood below, holding the ladder steady, a job that shook my arms to jelly by noon. "You okay, kiddo?" he called down. "Solid as a rock," I answered, grinning so hard my face hurt. Later, when the platform was done, Victor sprawled on his back and claimed the corner nearest the window. Elena hung a string of plastic stars. I crawled up last and wedged myself beside the hatch. Every time someone went in or out, they stepped on my hand. I said nothing. I didn't have a language for small injuries, not yet. Christmases carried the same secret math. Victor unwrapped a thick down jacket, Elena a silver bracelet in a velvet box. My gift was a used camera wrapped in brown paper, a little scuffed around the lens. I played it off as cool, tracing the old scratches with my nail. Mom shot me a look like I know. She took me outside in our pajamas to shoot the snow by the street lamp, coaching me to notice how the flakes caught the light in different shapes. That night alone in my room, I was giddy with possibility. Still, when Dad knocked to ask Victor how the jacket fit and never poked his head into my doorway, the joy dimmed at the edges. If that sounds petty, it's only because you're listening from the end of the story. At the time, it was just another bead on a string that would years later tighten around my throat. Elena grew up neat. Neat hair, neat grades, neat apologies that made people forgive her faster than they should. She learned early that standing in the middle kept you safe. She could sit with me in the nurse's office and then ride home with Victor without anyone calling her disloyal. I envied that bad kind of genius, the talent for staying clean while everyone else bled. "You're good at feelings," she told me once as teenagers, as if she were handing me a consolation prize for losing another argument with Dad. "And you're good at disappearing," I wanted to say, but didn't. When I was 19, I took a train to New York with 2 suitcases and a stomach full of acid. Agency life was fluorescent bright and merciless. New shoes gave me blisters. My first pitch deck looked like a ransom note, but I loved the speed. The subway roar, the click of keyboards at 1 a.m., the way the city punished you for being average and rewarded you when you refused. I found an apartment with a view of water I could barely afford, slept on a mattress on the floor for 3 months, learned the names of the baristas downstairs, because sometimes the only thing keeping you from crying on the sidewalk is a voice that knows your order. I was good at making things feel inevitable. That's what messaging is at its best, taking people by the hand and saying, "You were always going to choose this." My boyfriend then, a coder with quiet eyes, laughed at how I argued with cereal commercials. "You're scary," he told me once, sticking a Post-it with a heart on my laptop. In the best way. I told myself I was building a life that didn't need my father's approval to be real. Phone calls home grew shorter. Mom told me about the dahlias blooming and sent me care packages with crumbling oatmeal cookies. Dad said "proud of you" in a tone that sounded like he was reading off a checklist. Victor breezed in for holidays with stories about bonuses and vacations. Elena FaceTimed me from her couch with toddlers in her lap. "I'm tired all the time," she said, as if tiredness was the rent you paid to be a real adult. I sent gifts I picked out at midnight and overcompensated with expensive wrapping. When Mom was diagnosed, time went rubbery. Days stretched and snapped. We took turns sitting by her bed in a room that smelled like lemon cleaner and old flowers. She wore a scarf tied at the back of her head and still asked if we'd eaten if the laundry got folded, as if love could be smuggled into a house disguised as chores. Dad hovered like a satellite fallen out of orbit and burning up. He wasn't built for helplessness. It looked wrong on him, like a suit one size too small. I tried to make myself useful. I organized prescription bottles, bought a whiteboard for the fridge, and wrote down doses in block letters, hunted for a doctor who would say this was a mistake. When she died, it was spring. The house bloomed and felt empty at the same time. People brought casseroles. We forgot to eat them. After the funeral, neighbors left with paper plates and sorry eyes. Dad stood in the front hall, hand on the banister, and looked so young and so old all at once I wanted to hold him by the shoulders, like he was about to tip off a ledge. Victor had business calls in the driveway. Elena's kids were fussy and needed naps. I folded the last of the funeral program sheets into a drawer and heard the house breathe in a long, shaky inhale. I flew back to New York and pretended to click back into my life. The office smelled like coffee and toner and ambition. I built my decks. I pitched. I ate dinner out of a cardboard box over the sink. At night, I found myself standing on the fire escape with my bare feet on cold metal, listening to traffic that sounded like the ocean. I called Dad, and he said he was fine. Everyone says they're fine when their heart is a cracked bowl trying not to leak. Elena sent pictures of the kids with signs that said, "We love you, Grandpa." Victor emailed a spreadsheet with estate tasks in the subject line, and 10 bullet points underneath like grief could be itemized. The first time Elena called to say Dad wasn't eating, I bought a plane ticket before she finished her sentence. In person, he was thinner, the blue in his eyes washed out like jeans left in the sun too long. He kept opening the pantry, looking for something and forgetting what it was. "What can I do?" I asked in the kitchen hands around a mug I wasn't drinking. Elena shrugged the kind of shrug that says I did my part by telling you. Victor arrived that afternoon and proposed a meal delivery plan, which he emailed from the living room couch like a consultant. I cooked instead, fry pans and garlic the way Mom had, filling the house with smells that lied to the body and said, "You're hungry." Dad ate 2 bites and fell asleep in his chair. Flying back and forth made my life look like a dotted line on a map. I stacked boarding passes with rubber bands. I typed copy revisions at hospital cafeterias. My boyfriend asked how long I could keep it up. As long as I need to, I said, like stamina was a virtue in itself. When he asked me to move in, I asked for time. When he asked again, I said I couldn't. He didn't slam doors. He just closed the one between us and let it latch. The night I decided to move home, the radiator in my apartment clicked like a metronome, counting out a tempo I couldn't match anymore. I looked out at the water that had once told me I was small in a thrilling way and felt tired. Not the good tired after you've done something hard and clean. The kind that makes your bones feel borrowed. I packed in silence. In the morning, I left my keys on the counter beside the post-it heart he'd stuck to my laptop months ago. I took a picture of the kitchen for no reason I can explain and got in a cab. Back at the house, the routines I built were small and deliberate. Monday laundry, Tuesday pills set in a plastic organizer Mom would have hated because it was ugly. Wednesday walks on the block, Dad's hand on my elbow like a gentleman escorting a lady even when I was the one keeping him steady. He remembered things in bursts like flare guns. He'd point at the maple and say, "Your mother hung you by your ankles from that branch," and I'd tease him, "You mean Victor," so the story wouldn't sting. We learned how to talk around the holes. In the quiet moments, the house felt like a museum, dust motes drifting like slow confetti. The fridge hum a constant bass note. I worked remote for a while, then stopped meaning to start again and never did. People in town started to recognize me at the grocery store checkout. "You're Richard's girl," they said, and I nodded like a name tag I didn't pin on myself but didn't rip off either. Victor visited when it fit his calendar. He brought a leather portfolio and opinions wrapped as facts. "You're good at caregiving," he told me once, which sounded like, "You're good at staying in one place." Elena came with the kids and wiped counters like she lived there, which made me want to hand her a bill and a mop. She meant well, she always means well, she just thinks good intentions are a currency you can spend anywhere. "You could come back to the city," she said, skimming a parenting blog on her phone, the screen lighting her face like a campfire story. "Find a job that lets you work from here sometimes. Balance." Balance, I learned, is what people advise you to chase when they've already chosen what to drop. I kept the house running. I fixed a leaky faucet with a YouTube tutorial. I painted the upstairs hallway a white called winter linen and hated it instantly. I folded Dad's sweaters the way Mom did, pressing the seam along the shoulder. At night, I took my laptop to the kitchen table and researched elder care laws I didn't understand yet. I read about power of attorney and guardianship and wished the words didn't taste like sand in my mouth. The first time I saw Cassandra, the clinic lighting flattened her into something glossy. She had nurse's scrubs and a smile that lingered 1 second too long. She called my father darling the way waitresses call you "Han smooth as oil." He brightened almost shyly the way lonely people do when kindness comes packaged as attention. I thanked her on the way out because I was raised to, and she squeezed my arm. "We look after our own," she said. Her hands were soft. I told myself I was being unfair, reading malice into ordinary lines. People are allowed to be kind. I didn't know it then, but that sentence would come back to haunt me. On better days, Dad remembered the way to Crystal Lake. We drove early, the sky a cheap watercolor. The dock boards moaned under our feet. He told me again for the 20th time how he'd proposed to Mom here with a ring that wasn't expensive but sparkled anyway because he held it up to catch the light just right. She said yes before I finished the sentence, he said, laughing at his own impatience. I imagined them both and felt my chest go tight from missing a future I'd never get to meet. I promised him that day I'd take him back when it got warmer. He patted my hand. "You sound like your mother," he said, and it was the highest praise I had ever earned. The day I found a white pill on the counter that didn't match any on the list, I didn't go nuclear. I took a photo with the kitchen light off so the flash popped bright and clinical, then again, with the light on. I bagged the pill in a sandwich baggie. I called the pharmacy and asked questions until the tech's tone sharpened with impatience. Then I hung up and cooked dinner because Dad was hungry at exactly 6, and hunger is bigger than suspicion when you're tired. After he went to bed, I washed the pan and stared at the sink until the water turned lukewarm. I told myself there would be time to think tomorrow. There's always time until there isn't. Cassandra started stopping by on days she wasn't assigned. She brought scones in a white box tied with twine and told me my father was such a dear. Victor liked her because she agreed with him. Elena liked her because liking people is her default setting. I didn't know what I felt yet. A prickling at the base of my skull. A draft under a door I couldn't locate. When she opened the medicine cabinet while telling a story, I watched her hands more than I listened to her voice. She caught me watching and smiled. On the night before Dad's 70th, I found Mom's recipe card for pastry tucked behind the flour canister, her handwriting swelling at the loops like a signature. The kitchen smelled like butter and cinnamon and ghosts. Butter banged against the sides of the mixer, a loud, cheerful sound. Flour dusted the countertop like early snow. The dough came together and then fell apart, and I nearly cried because it shouldn't be this hard to get right when your life was falling apart in bigger, louder ways. I pressed the heel of my hand into the counter and told myself to finish the crust first, then panic. Finish one task before you drown. Simple rules save lives. I went up to the attic to pull down photo boxes and lost an hour. My mother in a yellow dress, smile bright as a kitchen light. My father on a bridge in a hard hat, wind roughing his hair into a boy's. Victor at 15, jaw already set in that way that made you forgive him for nothing and everything. Elena holding a bouquet of wildflowers like she'd stitched the whole field together herself. Me with frosting on my nose, 8 years old and smug about a cake that was probably inedible. I made a wall of our life in the living room, arranging the frames so the years connected in a path your eye could follow. It felt like laying down a trail home just in case someone got lost on the way. I didn't see the ambush coming, not the shape of it, but I felt the pressure building like a storm behind drywall, muffled, persistent, a throb you can ignore until the ceiling caves. I fell asleep that night with flour under my fingernails and my phone by my face, a half-written message to Nathan open like a flare I hadn't fired yet. When I first moved back into the house full-time, I told myself it was temporary. A season, no more. I even left half my clothes in New York as if that would tether me to the life I'd built there. The first morning I woke in my childhood bedroom, the wallpaper still patterned with faded moons and stars. Dust streaked across the dresser like fingerprints from ghosts. My father shuffled past the doorway, muttering about the coffee pot, wearing the same plaid shirt he had worn for years. For a second, I felt 10 again, late for school. Then, the weight hit, Mom was gone, and I was here to fill the space she left. Those first weeks blurred. Grocery runs, pill bottles lined like soldiers' insurance forms that read like riddles. I learned to read his moods by the slump of his shoulders. On good days, he'd quiz me about bridge designs from old magazines, a spark in his eyes as if he were back at the drafting table. On bad days, he sat in the dark living room TV, flickering without sound, whispering my mother's name. I stopped wearing watches. Time became elastic, measured in doses and doctor visits. At night, I'd lie in bed and hear the creak of the house, the fridge cycling the rustle of branches. New York noise had been constant sirens honking footsteps overhead. Here, the quiet was sharp, accusatory. It asked what I was doing throwing away everything I'd built. I told myself I was strong enough to ignore it, but loneliness has claws. It scratches when the lights go out. Cassandra arrived slowly, like a draft you can't find the source of. At first, she was just the nurse who remembered Dad's birthday, who brought magazines to his checkups. She had auburn hair pulled into a tight-knot smile wide enough to reach strangers across a waiting room. Dad perked up when she entered, his posture straighter, his laugh louder. I wanted to be glad to see him light up again. But something about her cadence felt rehearsed, like lines she'd delivered before. She started stopping by after shifts, carrying little boxes from the bakery. Thought Richard might like something sweet. She stayed through dinner washing dishes while humming. Victor was impressed. Finally, Dad's got someone looking after him. He said it like my months of unpaid care were invisible. Elena chimed in. At least Dad won't be lonely. Their approval wrapped Cassandra in a glow I couldn't pierce. Meanwhile, she'd glance at me with the kind of smile that says, I know you see through me, and I dare you to say it out loud. Then came the medication. One night, I found Dad drowsy at 7 p.m. His words slurred. I checked his pill organizer and noticed an unfamiliar capsule tucked in Friday's slot. When I asked Cassandra, she shrugged. Just a mild sedative, perfectly safe. He was restless. Her tone was syrupy, but her eyes dared me to challenge her. I snapped a photo of the pill under the kitchen light. Evidence, though, I didn't know yet what to do with it. Victor's visits grew sharper, not softer. He breezed in with his leather briefcase, glanced at Dad like he was checking a stock price. He needs professional care, Marta. You're playing nurse, and it's not sustainable. He adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, never meeting my eyes for more than a second. I wanted to scream that I had given up my career, my relationship, my city. Instead, I bit my tongue until I tasted iron. Thanks for your input, I said flatly. He left in a gleaming car tail lights burning red in the dusk. Phone calls from Elena didn't help. She spoke in platitudes. Marta, you're amazing, but Dad wouldn't want you sacrificing everything. Think about your future. Her voice was soft, but beneath it I heard relief that someone else had shouldered the burden. She could go back to lesson plans and soccer practice guilt-free. She told me I was hiding from real life. I laughed bitterly after hanging up. If this wasn't real life, then what was? The house began to feel like a stage set, Cassandra rearranging props. She insisted on moving family photos off the mantel, too much dust. She brought curtains in colors Mom would have hated. When I objected, she said it's Richard's home too, and he deserves a fresh start. Dad nodded vaguely, half aware, his hand trembling as he reached for tea she'd poured. The scent was herbal sweet. Too sweet. I sipped it once and gagged at the bitterness beneath. One afternoon, Paul the neighbor stopped me at the mailbox. Strange folks poking around your place earlier, he said, adjusting his cap. Measuring, taking photos. Said something about property value. My stomach nodded. Cassandra had been hosting coffee chats with Victor at the kitchen table, papers spread between them. Each time I entered, they snapped the folders shut. Insurance paperwork, she claimed, her smile tight. I knew better, I just couldn't prove it. At night, I replayed old memories like a film reel. Mom in the garden, dirt under her nails, telling me to chase what lit me up, not what looked good on paper. Dad's laughter booming on camping trips. The taste of burnt marshmallows, the sting of mosquito bites. Crystal Lake, the morning mist, my parents arm in arm on the dock. The story of the proposal retold so often it felt carved into the water itself. That lake was the anchor proof that love once ran deep here. I promised myself I'd take Dad back there one day, no matter what it cost me. But each week, the walls closed in. Cassandra's toothbrush appeared in the upstairs bathroom. Her perfume lingered in the hallway. She started correcting me in front of Dad. Marta. He doesn't need that much salt, Marta. The doctor said less walking, more rest. Richard, half fogged by whatever she slipped him, nodded along. The house that had been my mother's sanctuary now smelled of someone else's hand lotion. I started writing everything down. What pills I gave, what time, what Cassandra added, who visited, what they said. A secret ledger tucked under my mattress. Evidence, I told myself. Or maybe it was just sanity on paper. Some nights I lay awake listening to Dad's uneven breathing, the faint tick of Cassandra's heels leaving the kitchen, and felt like I was the only witness to a slow theft no one else wanted to see. The last straw came weeks before the birthday party. Elena called Voice Chipper asking if I'd coordinate decorations since you're so good at that stuff. Then she added almost offhand, Victor says it'd be best to discuss Dad's assets while everyone's together. Make it official. My hand went cold on the phone. Assets. The word was a scalpel cutting away pretense. This wasn't about care, it was about control. That night I drove Dad to Crystal Lake. He dozed beside me, head bobbing with the rhythm of the car. The water was steel gray under a bruised sky. I wheeled him onto the dock, wrapped him in a blanket. He blinked clearer than he had in weeks and whispered, Your mother would want this house to stay with you. My throat closed. I promised him aloud this time I'll protect it. I'll protect you. I didn't know then how close we were to the ambush, but I could feel it, the way animals sense storms before clouds gather. Cassandra's eyes glittered sharper. Victor's messages grew brisker. Elena's silence lengthened. The house creaked at night like it knew what was coming, and I lay awake with my notebook of evidence under my mattress, repeating my promise like a prayer. I started counting time by the sound of the kettle. It clicked on at 6 each morning, the pulse of the house waking up. Some days my father shuffled into the kitchen before the water boiled, humming a tune only he could hear. Other days he sat at the table staring at the steam and asked carefully what comes first, coffee or filter. I answered gently and watched his hands, those old engineer hands, tremble in the way that made me want to take the world apart and put it back together in pieces he could hold. I kept a notebook in the junk drawer. On the first page I wrote a date and the words, "good day" or "foggy," and a short sentence that would make sense later. He laughed at a joke about the weather. He forgot my name for a breath, then remembered it and kissed my knuckles like he used to kiss my mother's when he came home late. Under that, I wrote the doses and times I had given him. Behind that blank pages, I did not know yet that I would fill every one. The first crack showed up on a Wednesday when Cassandra came by with a paper bag from the bakery and a smile that filled the doorway. She touched my father's shoulder as if she were setting a glass on a table. I brewed tea while they chatted about the neighborhood tulips. When I turned back to the counter, her hand was on the pill organizer. It was quick neat. A flicker. A small click that sounded like a bead falling into a dish. I would have missed it if the kitchen had been louder. It wasn't. The house held its breath. I waited until she and Dad settled in the living room. I lifted the Friday tab. Nestled among the familiar shapes was a capsule I didn't recognize. White, almost pretty. I took a photo with my phone. The light over the stove warmed everything into forgiveness, so I took another under the harsh ceiling fixture. That one showed edges. I labeled the photos in a new folder called Receipts and slid the organizer back into place, hands steady from practice, not confidence. When Cassandra left, she hugged me. Her hair smelled like cherry shampoo and something chemical beneath. In the doorway, she said we were a great team. "You take such good care of him, Marta." Then she looked down at the laces of her shoes and smiled the way people smile when they have something better to say, but they save it for later. I took the capsule to a pharmacist the next day. He wore a name tag that said Vince and had the kind of patience that belongs to people who have watched everything. He lined up photos of Dad's prescriptions on the counter like a detective laying out weapons. His finger hovered over the unfamiliar pill. "Not on this list." He didn't say more, but he didn't need to. He slid me a card. "If you want to confirm composition without sending it to a lab, call her. She's a friend. Former tech. She'll tell you what she can." I called from the parking lot with the car door still open, cold air on my shins. The woman on the other end answered on the second ring and listened while I described what I'd found. She asked a few careful questions and gave me an over-the-counter name for a strong sedative with a polite warning baked inside it. "It's not the worst thing in the world in tiny doses. It is the worst thing in the world if someone doesn't know they're taking it." I thanked her and wrote the name on my palm like a cheat sheet. That night, I crushed garlic and listened to the knife chatter a rhythm against the board. My father drifted into the kitchen, smiling at the smell as if it were a story he remembered from childhood. Cassandra arrived later than usual, cheeks flushed, and stood close behind me to comment on the sauce. Her breath warmed the back of my neck. When she reached past me for a spoon, I caught sight of a faint powder on her fingertips that she rubbed away on a dish towel. "You cook like your mother," she said, and turned to my father with a softness that looked like love if you wanted it to. I wanted it to. I didn't let myself. I started setting tiny traps. I moved the organizer a half-inch left and marked its position on the shelf with a pencil line I could erase. I counted pills, not just doses. I wrote down hours. I watched how sleepy came for my father, whether it rolled in gradually like weather or fell all at once like a curtain. Every pattern has a seam. I kept tugging, waiting to feel where it gave. Victor called on a Sunday morning as I scrubbed a pan with stubborn burnt bits glued to its bottom. He didn't ask how Dad was. He asked when I planned to admit that what I was doing was unsustainable. He used the word facilities as if it were a magic spell that made hard things reasonable. He said the word liability, and I laughed because in his mouth it sounded like a person. He asked if I had thought about what abandoning my career would do to my future, then mentioned a senior community with a view of a golf course, as if that view could replace my mother's hand on the banister. I said thanks. He said I was being emotional. I told him that was the point. He sighed. Money was always calmer than grief. That afternoon, I found Cassandra alone at the kitchen table with a man I'd never seen. They sat shoulder-to-shoulder heads, bent paper spread like a fan between them. The man had a real estate smile, the kind that shows teeth in the way a dog might when it wants to convince you it's not going to bite. Cassandra closed a folder when I walked in and rotated another toward him with her ring finger. "Insurance paperwork," she said lightly. I poured water into a glass so I would have a noise to make and stood at the sink where I could watch their reflections in the window. The man laughed and touched the edge of one of the sheets with a pen. His laugh didn't sound like it belonged in our kitchen. After he left, I heard Cassandra on the phone in the hallway near the coat closet, her voice a thread I followed down the house. "He'll sign if we manage the dose," she said before catching herself and lowering her tone. It was the kind of sentence that falls apart when you shine light on it. It needs the dark to hold. I called Nathan from the car with the heat blasting at my feet. He listened without interrupting, which was the gift I didn't know I needed. He asked for dates for names for what I could prove and what I felt. "There's a difference," he said gently, "and both matter." He asked for a day when my father was clearest. I told him mornings were best if Cassandra hadn't been through the night before. He told me to pick one and bring my father to his office. Quietly. No Cassandra. He would have a notary present. He would have forms ready to revoke any future documents we hadn't seen yet. He would draft a healthcare proxy naming Uncle James and me. We would take a video. We would speak carefully, simply, and ask questions no one had told my father how to answer. Uncle James met me at the diner the next day. The waitress topped off our coffee until it went cold. He was pale from treatment, but his eyes were a bright blue that always made me think of frost on a window. He pulled a thin folder from his briefcase and laid out printouts of statutes the way my father used to lay out bridge plans, finger tracing the lines. "Elder abuse isn't a feeling," he said softly. "But a pattern is. You're building a record. You're doing it right." He told me where to place cameras so they would cover the common areas without violating anything that would give Cassandra room to threaten us back. He made a list of witnesses to approach neighbors who would sign an affidavit if asked. He paid the bill and left the tip in cash tucked under the sugar caddy a little too carefully. He was tired when he stood, and when I reached to touch his arm, he patted my hand like I was the one who needed reassuring. Installing the cameras felt like a betrayal. I did it anyway. They were small, quiet, with a faint red blink that made my stomach twist. I mounted one on the shelf above the kitchen island where my mother used to rest her cookbook, another near the hallway mirror that reflected the living room couch. I told myself if I was wrong, I would take them down and pretend I had never needed them. I told myself if I waited for perfect certainty, I would be too late. The first week the cameras captured nothing except the inside of a life. My father dozing with the newspaper spread like a blanket on his lap. The mail slot clack. My bare feet padding to the sink late at night. Cassandra moved through the rooms like a woman in a catalog. Perfect posture, perfect hands. Every kindness visible, every suspicion shaped like a shadow you could talk yourself out of believing in. On a rainy Thursday, the footage clicked into something else. At 9:30, after I took Dad to bed and shut off the hall light, Cassandra came back downstairs. She didn't know about the camera above the island. She had been in the doorway when I put it up, chatting about a rerun she loved while I stood on a chair. In the glow from the stove, she opened the medicine cabinet, took out Dad's pill organizer, and set it beside her purse. Then she took a small amber bottle from her bag, rattled 2 tablets into her palm, and with a nail tapped them into Friday's compartment. The sound was soft and obscene. She returned the bottle to her purse and shut the organizer, slipping it back into place with a little pat the way you pat a child's head. She rinsed her hands under the tap and dried them on the dish towel that still smelled faintly of my mother's cinnamon bread. Her face as she did it was beautifully blank. I watched the clip twice, 3 times. I watched it until I knew the exact moment her mouth tightened, the exact moment her shoulders fell an inch, the exact moment she smoothed her hair without thinking. I copied it into a folder labeled Kitchen. I gave the file a name with the date and time and the word addition. The word looked criminal and insufficient. I turned off the light and sat at the table in the dark, hearing the rain pretend to be footsteps on the porch. The next morning, I made Dad pancakes and distracted him with a story about the time we burned our first batch with Mom and ate them anyway, syrup, making everything taste like victory. Cassandra arrived half an hour late, apologetic, with a new brand of tea, a gift. The box said sleep in a font that tried too hard to be gentle. I put it on the shelf and wrote the time on a sticky note instead. I needed more than video. I needed proof that went inside the body. I called Dr. Kapoor, a geriatrician Nathan trusted, not the office Cassandra always steered us toward. He agreed to meet us early on a Tuesday, his first slot. "Bring your notebook," he said. "Bring your father when he's most himself." He spoke to my father for 40 minutes without a single test that felt like a trick. He asked about bridges and how my father had solved specific problems in the 70s. He asked what my mother baked on holidays, not the name, but the smell. He asked my father to describe the directions from our house to the hardware store and to close his eyes and draw the route with his finger. Then he looked at me and said quietly, "If the medications are what you suspect, we'll know in blood work within 24 hours. He printed a request and handed it to a nurse with a runner's efficiency. He told my father he was doing fine for a man with grief sitting on his chest. Back home, I found Victor in the kitchen with Cassandra again. They hadn't heard the car. Their heads were close. Cassandra was angry in the way people get when they have been promised something specific and are being offered something else. Victor was calm in the way men are when they are sure they can make you wrong by calling you hysterical. He saw me and his voice went smooth. We were just talking options. The word was as oily as ever. Cassandra placed a hand on his sleeve and said nothing. I went upstairs and sat on the floor in the hallway, my back against the wall. I counted my breaths until my chest slowed and my hands stopped shaking. Then I slid my phone out and opened my father's messages to help him with a contact he always misdialed. His recent texts included an old thread with Cassandra's number before it had a name attached back when it was just digits. The thread went back 3 years. I scrolled and the words arranged themselves into a plan. Perfect mark. Widower with property. Daughter in residence might complicate. Won't. I took screenshots and saved them to a cloud folder Nathan had created for me under a name no one would think to open. I didn't cry. Crying felt like leaving the room. After dinner, I walked next door and asked Paul and Linda to sit with me for 10 minutes. Linda set out cookies like we were kids again. I told them I might need their eyes, not their opinions, just what they had seen. Linda said she had watched 2 different men with tape measures walking the property line in the last month. Paul said they were polite and didn't make eye contact. He wrote down dates for me from the calendar they kept on the fridge with little squares for each day, everything logged in a shorthand I found comforting. I thanked them and promised I would bring back their Tupperware. Linda squeezed my shoulders at the door in a way that said, "You are not crazy, and I am sorry you have to do this." That weekend, Uncle James and I took my father to Nathan's office under the pretense of a check-in about paperwork for insurance, the one phrase that calmed Victor's interrogation if he called. Nathan had cleaned his conference table until it gleamed. There was a small camera on a shelf that looked like a book. The notary had a vanilla lotion smell that made the room softer. Nathan spoke to my father like an engineer speaks to another engineer, not like a boy to a broken man. He explained what a power of attorney was. He explained what a revocation was. He explained the difference between limited and durable and asked my father to repeat it back in his own words. My father did. It took time. He did it. When my father placed his signature at the bottom of the documents, his hand shook only once. Nathan nodded as if a bridge had held. He asked my father to look into the camera and say that he understood and that no one had told him what to sign. My father did. He said that he wanted to stay in his home, that it was the place his wife had loved, that he preferred in-home care if his health required it. The notary witnessed stamped, dated. The sound of the stamp felt like a door shutting on a room where a fire had been. Uncle James exhaled in a way that made me realize he had been holding his breath for a year. We hid one set of originals in Nathan's safe and one in a place Cassandra would never touch because it was ugly and because it belonged to my father's boyhood. The tackle box from the garage still smelled like metal and old lake water. We slid the documents into a sleeve and tucked them under the top tray beneath the lures and lines. I put the tackle box back where it had been under a shelf of coffee cans full of screws stored by type my father's meticulousness, working for us in a way that made my throat hurt. I spent the next days building a timeline like a spine. I printed photos with timestamps. I clipped bank alerts Nathan had flagged where small sums had been siphoned, then padded into larger ones, fees labeled management and review. I traced transfers to a company with a neat name that meant nothing. When I asked my father about the withdrawals on a clear morning, he shook his head, cheeks flushing with anger. I hadn't seen in months. He had never hired anyone for financial services. He didn't like to think about money as a thing he couldn't touch. He liked bills on the table stacked by due date. He liked paper. The novelty of logins had always irritated him. Cassandra had taken over online banking because it was too confusing. Victor had called it efficient. I called it a trail. The cameras caught Cassandra again 2 nights later, humming softly as she lifted the organizer and shook her head at the contents like a mother scolding a child. She removed a little, added a little, then left a note on the counter for me in her bright looping handwriting. He seemed restless. Adjusted slightly. Rest is important for the brain. A smiley face at the end, as if that made it medicine. I photographed the note and put it under the same name as the video so they would sit together like twin stones. If this all sounds clinical, it wasn't. It was sticky. It was the taste of fear when it hits the back of your tongue and makes you feel like you swallowed a coin. It was jumping at the sound of a door closing and feeling foolish and angry at yourself for the jump. It was washing a mug twice because you could not shake the feeling that something had been in the first rinse that didn't belong to you. Elena came by with her kids and told me I looked tired in a voice that meant I should be careful not to look tired. She stepped over the box of files on the floor and turned in a circle in the living room, searching for something she couldn't name. She asked if Cassandra had been helpful. I told her Cassandra had been present. Elena nodded like presence was enough. I considered telling her about the videos, the pills, the night calls. I didn't. I didn't want to hear her say you must be mistaken and watch relief wash over her face like a warm bath. I told Nathan about the men measuring the yard. He told me to photograph any business cards, any car logos, any faces if I could, without drawing a line between myself and their attention. He told me to keep all of this to myself for now. He told me timing was the trick, not the tools. He said a bad reveal gives your enemy a way back in. A good one leaves them standing on air. I didn't sleep much the week before my father's birthday. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cassandra's ring in the light as she tapped pills into a little square. I saw Victor's mouth flattening when he didn't get the answer he wanted. I saw my father's signature settling onto the page like a bird that had been flying too long. I lay awake and listened to the house, wondering what it remembered, whether my mother would have known sooner, whether she would have thrown Cassandra out with a kind smile and a firm hand, or invited her into the kitchen and fed her until she told the truth. My mother had believed in the usefulness of kindness. She had also believed in locks. The day before the party, a courier came to the door with the first set of lab results. The envelope was heavier than it looked. Dr. Kapor had circled the readings in blue ink and written a line in his neat square hand: presence of sedative not prescribed, levels consistent with repeated dosing. He added another note about the improvement in cognition across the day we had tested without any alterations. The words sat on the page with a patience I found unbearable. I took a photo, then another. I added the images to the folder with the videos and the screenshots and the neighbors' calendar entries. The folder looked like a small city by then, full of proofs. That evening, Cassandra arrived with flowers and a laugh, Victor with a bakery cake he'd ordered in a rush and pretended he'd spent hours on. Elena with napkins and a phone full of Pinterest photos and the kind of intention that makes you forgive and then regret it. I stood in the doorway and watched them move through the rooms, laying claim to space that did not belong to them in the way they wanted it to. My father smiled at everyone with a sweetness that made me want to scream and then bite my tongue to keep from ruining the one thing he had left, which was the ability to feel celebrated for a breath. I excused myself and stepped onto the porch. The air had that knife edge that comes before rain. I dialed Nathan and said the 2 words we had agreed would be enough. It's happening. He didn't ask questions. He said he was on his way. I texted Uncle James the same and got back a thumbs up I could picture as his hand steady even when the rest of him wasn't. I slid my phone into my pocket and put my palm flat on the door as if I could read the house's pulse through wood. Inside, Cassandra practiced astonishment in the hall mirror and smoothed her dress. Victor rehearsed a toast under his breath, the kind you give when you want a room to think you did something noble. Elena stacked plates and tried not to choose sides. My father sat in the chair at the head of the table with a napkin folded in a triangle in his lap, eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. He looked up at the family wall I had made and smiled. He didn't know yet that we had already begun to turn the room into a courtroom. He didn't know that the photos would be witnesses. He only knew he was loved, and that was almost true. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer with my notebook and took out a new envelope. I slid the lab results inside, then the printed screenshots, then a copy of the revocation and the healthcare proxy, then the affidavit drafts Paul and Linda had said they would sign. I labeled it with a simple number 1. In the second envelope, I placed a thumb drive with the videos and a backup of the cloud folder in case someone got clever. I labeled it 2. I hadn't decided yet if I would open them in order. I had decided that Cassandra would be the one to watch me do it. Back in the dining room, Cassandra leaned down and murmured in my father's ear, and he nodded because it's polite to nod when someone leans down and murmurs in your ear at your birthday dinner. Victor raised his glass, and the room went quiet the way rooms do when they're about to be told who they are. I stood at the doorway and felt the same clarity I had felt the day I left New York with 2 suitcases, a corridor opening. A choice that was not a choice. You step forward or you start dying more than you already are. I took one breath and stepped. I didn't sleep the night before my father's birthday. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw Cassandra's manicured hand hovering over the pill box, Victor's smirk rehearsing victory, Elena's uncertain face caught between siblings. My chest ached with the weight of silence. But silence had given them room to move. This time, I would not be silent. The plan wasn't born overnight. It was built piece by piece, each discovery pressed into place like bricks in a wall. I had enough evidence now to crush them, but evidence only matters if revealed at the right moment. Nathan called it timing. Uncle James called it theater. I called it survival. That morning, I drove into town with 2 envelopes on the passenger seat. Envelope 1 printed lab results, screenshots of texts, notarized documents revoking Victor's so-called authority. Envelope 2, the thumb drive with camera footage labeled in my handwriting so there could be no mistaking who had collected it. The paper rattled with every pothole. My hands clenched the steering wheel white-knuckled. At Nathan's office, I laid the envelopes on his desk. "You'll bring them yourself?" I asked. He nodded. "You open them when the moment hits. Don't waste ammunition too soon. What if they grab the papers? Try to bury it in chaos." "Then you smile," Nathan said, "and tell them copies live in 5 other places." "Which they do." James sat in the corner, a scarf around his neck, skin pale from chemo, but his eyes were clear, steady. "Remember, Marta, you don't just want to win. You want the room to see the truth. Shame does the cutting for you." I inhaled. The room smelled of old paper and coffee. And if they deny everything James tapped his folder, then you let their own words hang them. You've got the texts, the signatures, the overdrafts. Cassandra and Victor can scream all they want. People believe what they see with their eyes. The next days blurred into preparation. I rehearsed in the bathroom mirror, voice low, practicing how to say, "This stops now," without shaking. I printed extra copies of the documents and hid them in 3 places under Dad's tackle box in my car glove compartment and in the hymnal shelf at church. Insurance against fire. At night, I tested the projector Nathan had lent me, a small device that could plug into a laptop. We decided to load one video, the cleanest clip of Cassandra swapping pills. Not all of them, just enough to break her mask. The rest would follow like dominoes. I practiced clicking pause at the right second. Her hand over the organizer, the pill falling, her blank face afterward, freeze frame betrayal. Meanwhile, I strengthened my father for what was coming. On mornings when Cassandra was absent, I gave him clear water, good food walks around the block. His steps were slow, but his eyes sharper. Sometimes he'd grip my hand and whisper, "Something's wrong, isn't it?" I'd nod, "We'll make it right." He believed me, and that belief became my armor. Victor's emails kept arriving CC'd to Elena. Subject lines: Asset Strategy Care Transition, Urgent Timeline. I ignored them. Every click would have pulled me into his rhythm. Instead, I let him build his stage, his certainty. Predators are easiest to expose when they think you've stopped running. The hardest part was Elena. One night she called, voice heavy. Marta, I think you're too close to this. Dad needs order. Victor says I cut in cold because Victor wants. She went silent. Then, I just don't want to lose both my sister and my father. I almost softened. Almost. But then I remembered Cassandra's ring glinting under the kitchen light. You won't lose Dad, I told her. You'll lose the illusions. Be ready. The day before the party, I drove Dad to Crystal Lake. Mist hung over the water, the dock slick with dew. I wheeled him to the edge and let him breathe it in. Remember what you told me, Dad. That Mom would want the house safe with me. He nodded, eyes watering. Tomorrow, I'll prove it. They won't take this from us. He squeezed my hand. His grip was weak, but the intent was strong. Your mother always said you had her fire. Don't let them douse it. I promised him. Then I promised myself. That night I spread papers across my bed like a war map. Lab results in one pile, photos in another. Camera stills clipped with binder clips. Each piece had a number, a purpose. I rehearsed again, open with calm, let them mock, then strike. The order mattered: shock, then confirmation, then humiliation. Before midnight, James called. His voice was tired, hoarse, but certain. Marta, tomorrow isn't just their trap. It's your trial run for the rest of your life. Win here and you'll know you can face anyone. I'm scared, I admitted. Good, he said. Fear means you're awake. Just don't let it drive. Morning of the party. Autumn sunlight poured in sharp and golden. I wore a simple navy dress cardigan tight at the elbows. Nothing flashy, just steady. Cassandra arrived early, her perfume filling the hall, her laugh brittle. She kissed Dad's cheek and whispered something that made his brow crease. I watched, silently memorizing every angle. Victor followed, cufflinks, gleaming documents bulging in his leather case. He looked like a man about to close the deal of his life. Elena trailed behind, carrying napkins and guilt. I carried envelopes 1 and 2 in my purse, the weight digging into my shoulder. My heart beat like a second clock. I whispered to myself over and over, timing. Theater. Survival. The birthday table gleamed under chandelier light. China plates, crystal glasses, the roast carved neatly in front of my father. Blue and white balloons trembled in the draft from the hallway. For one fragile hour, it looked like family. Then Victor tapped his spoon to his glass. The room fell still. He rose, shoulders squared, leather folder tucked under his arm like a trophy. To Dad, he said smoothly, 70 years of hard work, of providing, of building bridges literally and figuratively. He let the pause hang smiling at the guests. Then his voice shifted. And now it's time for him to rest, to enjoy life without this burden. He opened the folder. Papers gleamed under chandelier light. As of today, by power of attorney, I will manage Dad's affairs. This home will be sold. Funds redirected to Oakwood Terraces, a premium senior facility. The best care money can buy. Forks clinked against plates. Patricia Cassandra clapped lightly, eyes shining. Elena shifted, uncomfortable. My father blinked in confusion. Victor turned to me. His smirk was a blade. So, Marta, pack your bags. You've done your part. Laughter rippled from Cassandra's friends. My chest burned, but I kept my face, still, voice steady. Are you done? Victor chuckled. That's all you've got. No argument, Smart. Makes this easier. I stood, pulled envelope 1 from my purse. Actually, I've got something. The room hushed. Cassandra's smile faltered. I laid the lab results on the table. Dr. Kapor's blood work. It shows Dad's system flooded with sedatives never prescribed by his doctor. I let the silence press in. Sedatives Cassandra administered. Gasps. My father looked down at his hands, then back at her. Sedatives. His voice cracked. Cassandra scoffed, syrupy sweet. That's ridiculous. He's confused. I've only ever helped him. I snapped the envelope shut. Confused because you drugged him. Victor barked a laugh. This is pathetic. You'll accuse anyone to cling to this house. Funny you mention the house, I said coldly. I slid the screenshots across the table. Here's 3 years of texts between you and Cassandra, long before she accidentally met Dad at the clinic, planning to target him, planning to get rid of me. Elena reached for the pages, eyes wide. Victor, is this true? He stiffened. Out of context. Lies. Time for envelope 2. I opened it slowly, savoring the tension. Pulled out the thumb drive. Shall we watch? Nathan, standing near the wall, connected the projector. The video filled the dining room wall, Cassandra in the kitchen, opening the pillbox, slipping in tablets. No narration needed. Just the click of pills falling into plastic compartments. The room was silent except for my father's sharp intake of breath. His voice trembled but carried. You've been drugging me. Cassandra's mask cracked. Harold, darling, don't listen, she's twisting. He cut her off louder than I'd heard in months. You drugged me. The guests shifted, murmurs rising. Cassandra's friends lowered their eyes. Victor slammed his hand on the table. Enough. This is slander. I have power of attorney, legal authority. I lifted the notarized revocation, stamped and signed. Held it high so every eye could see. Not anymore. Dad signed this weeks ago, sober witnessed. Healthcare proxy goes to Uncle James and me. Your paper is worthless. Uncle James, frail but steady, stepped forward. As his brother and legal witness, I confirm it. Victor's face drained of color. Elena whispered, horrified, You lied to me. You told me Dad wanted this. He sneered. Grow up, Elena. Houses don't feed kids. Money does, Cassandra snapped, turning on him. Don't you dare dump this on me. You promised me half the sale. The penthouse. Remember. The room froze. Her words hung in the air like smoke. My father's hand slammed the table, not trembling, now solid. Get out! His voice cracked like timber splitting. Both of you. Out of my house. Victor's jaw tightened. This isn't over. Nathan stepped in, voice smooth. Actually, it is. An emergency protective order is already filed. Bank accounts frozen. Property can't be touched. He tapped the stack of papers. Consider yourself served. Cassandra's mask collapsed. She grabbed her purse, muttering curses, then turned on Victor one last time. You said this would be easy. She stormed out, heels stabbing the floor. Victor lingered, face twisted. You'll regret this, Marta. I met his eyes steady. Not as much as you'll regret underestimating me. He shoved past, door slamming behind him. The room exhaled all at once. My father sagged in his chair. Elena burst into tears, whispering apologies. Guests whispered, shocked, ashamed. I gathered the envelopes, my hands finally shaking, but inside, a cold fire burned steady. This wasn't just defense. This was victory. The silence after the front door slammed felt heavier than the shouting had. The air smelled of candle wax and roast beef gone cold. For a moment, no one moved. Then my father exhaled a long, trembling breath, and the years seemed to slide off him like chains. He looked at me with clearer eyes than I had seen in months. You saved me, he whispered. Elena crumbled beside him, clutching his arm. Dad, I'm so sorry. I believed them. I believed Victor. Her voice shook with shame. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. I knew too well how persuasive Victor could be. Instead, I pulled a chair closer. We still have time to fix things, I said. What matters is you're here now. The neighbors, Paul and Linda, quietly confirmed what they had witnessed. Nathan collected signatures, affidavits ready. Uncle James leaned back exhausted but triumphant, his hand gripping mine with what little strength his treatments had spared him. The tide turned tonight, he murmured. But tides keep moving. Stay ready. The legal aftermath was swift. Cassandra vanished, her name whispered only in police reports. Victor faced investigation for financial abuse. His career as CFO teetered under headlines he couldn't spin. Elena shifted sides completely, visiting weekly guilt reshaping itself into care. For the first time in years, my father had both daughters at his table. It didn't heal everything, but it was something. And me, I carried both relief and emptiness. Revenge is never clean. Some nights I sat in the quiet house and felt the echo of Victor's threat. This isn't over. It played in my head like a low drumbeat. Because I knew men like him don't surrender. They wait. I strengthened my defenses anyway. Changed passwords, monitored accounts, kept cameras running. I smiled at Dad in the mornings, made him eggs just the way Mom used to, and hid my vigilance behind small talk. Protecting him had become my second skin. Yet I also learned forgiveness has limits. I forgave Elena slowly. I forgave myself for the years I thought I wasn't enough. But Victor Cassandra. Some bridges burn to ash and ash doesn't rebuild. Still in the quiet of evening, I wondered had I won or had I only survived the first round, because sometimes revenge is not an ending, it's the opening of another battle. Winter has settled in, but inside our old Victorian house, warmth lingers. Dad and I take morning walks. Elena sometimes joins, and for the first time in years, the silence feels gentle, not suffocating. I've started consulting again, remote work, small steps back toward my career, but without losing the promise I made to Mom to protect this home and him. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, know this, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments and subscribe to join me, because this fight, it's not over, and neither am I.